I'm sharing with you another pre-Lenten treat, this time from Poland. I'm making Faworki, or sometimes also called Chrust. This recipe was actually submitted to me by a subscriber and is her grandmother's recipe. I just love handwritten recipes like this. They have so many memories and love attached to them. This dessert is a fried dough sprinkled with powdered sugar, and it's traditionally eaten on Fat Thursday in Poland. So join me today as I show you how to make them, as well as share with you some Polish Carnival traditions. Let's get started. This is a pretty straightforward recipe that just involves mixing a simple dough and then rolling and cutting it out. Add 400 grams of all-purpose flour to a large bowl with 1 heaping teaspoon of baking powder. Give that a whisk, and then you're going to add 1 egg plus 2 egg yolks beaten, and 1 tablespoon of vodka or some kind of spirit. I'm using rum here. My subscriber who sent this in said this was her grandmother's secret ingredient. She would go to the liquor store and ask for vodka, but immediately add, "It's for the dough," so no one would think she was drinking it. I looked into other recipes for Faworki, and apparently alcohol really is the secret to the success of the recipe. You can make it without, but adding it helps to prevent the dough from absorbing too much oil during the frying process. So you'll see here that I'm adding sour cream a little bit at a time. The original recipe calls for 1/2 to 3/4 of a glass of sour cream. A Polish glass is roughly the same as an American cup. I have 3/4 of a cup, or 175 milliliters of sour cream here, and I'm adding a little bit at a time just until a nice dough forms. In the end, I added the full 3/4 of a cup plus another couple of tablespoons. So keep the container of sour cream nearby to use until you reach an elastic, smooth dough that doesn't stick to your hands. The consistency and smell of this dough reminded me of pasta dough, actually. So now divide your dough in half and wrap each of them in plastic wrap, but keep them at room temperature while you get your pot of oil ready for frying. Fill a large but shallow pot with a neutral tasting frying oil. I'm using canola oil here. And you'll want a couple of inches of oil. You'll need a frying or candy thermometer that sits on the side of your pot. Make sure it's not touching the bottom of the pot or the temperature won't be accurate. Next to your pot, set up a couple of baking trays with paper towels to set your fried dough on to drain. And you're going to set your oil to medium heat to let it slowly heat up while you're rolling out and cutting out your dough. Just make sure to check it periodically. You don't want it to get hotter than 350 degrees Fahrenheit or 176 Celsius. Now roll out the dough on a well-floured surface. You're going to roll it out pretty thinly, about 1/4 inch or 6 millimeters thick. And then you're going to cut 1.5 inch or 3 3/4 centimeter wide diagonal strips, and then cut both ends of those strips to be angled as well, and make a slit in the middle of each piece and thread the dough through the hole and pull gently until the center pops out and creates ribbony waves. While I'm doing this, I'll tell you a little bit about Carnival traditions in Poland. Carnival begins on January 6th with Epiphany, and the days traditionally closing Carnival are Fat Thursday and the following Ash Wednesday. And one of the most famous Carnival customs was the sleigh ride. This tradition was mainly practiced by the nobility, whose members, while enjoying the long winter afternoons in large horse-drawn sleighs, traveled from manor house to manor house, taking part in lavish feasts. Some sleigh rides could last even several days. Townspeople and peasants most often organized outdoor games and colorful parades at this time. One of the Shrovetide traditions are the Maskary Zapusty, or noisy people in costumes whose purpose was to drive away winter and bring spring. They visited local houses in disguise, singing and saying poems, asking for a gift in return. In the past, the most common costumes were bear, woman, old man, devil, gypsy, Jew, and Turon. The latter could not be missing in any parade, as it symbolizes strength, health, and energy. Animal skins, masks, and everyday clothes were used to create disguises. If you've learned something and are enjoying this video so far, hit that like button and consider subscribing. I make weekly videos featuring a European recipe and the history and traditions that go along with it. Now back to the dough. Place each piece on a baking sheet that you will later use to bring them to the stove to fry them. And I found that this dough really didn't stick together, so I was able to stack them on top of each other when I ran out of room on the baking sheet. Once your oil reaches 350 Fahrenheit, 176 Celsius, you can add a few at a time to the pot. A skewer is really helpful for these strips for moving them around and flipping them over. After the bottom side becomes golden, you're going to flip them and let them fry on the other side. And then once that side is golden, you can remove them to the paper towel lined baking sheet to cool. Make sure to keep an eye on the oil temperature. You will need to constantly adjust your stove temperature to keep it at 350 because you will find that as you add more dough, the oil temperature will start to drop. It really is a game of constantly adjusting your stove to keep the oil just right. If your oil cools too much, the dough will become oily, and if it gets too hot, it will burn. You don't want the oil to go higher than 5 to 10 degrees above 350. Once you're finished, heavily dust the fried dough in powdered sugar. And I suggest tossing them as well so that all sides get covered. Eat these the day they are made, as they will likely lose their crunch the next day. These were fun to make and surprisingly easy too. Let's give this a try. They're light as air and super crunchy and lightly sweet from the powdered sugar on top. I love them, they're really good. And I can see how this would be a delicious treat to have right before a fasting season. If you've never made a fried dessert before, this would be an easy introduction. They were pretty simple to make and they're not complicated because there's no yeast in them. So if you want to test the waters with fried foods, this would be a good recipe to start with. While you're waiting for the next video, make sure to check out my other Polish recipes, and also make sure you didn't miss the last 2 Carnival recipes that I recently shared. And I'll see you next time.